Morning, everyone. Happy Hump Day. And welcome to my one-woman new stand-up show, which I'm taking to the Edinburgh Festival this year, called The News Agenda, with me, Fleet Street Fox, and Fleet Street Fox, as it has been all week. But today I am actually joined by my fellow Mirror columnist, Mark Steele, and hopefully, because he's not in Parliament, we won't have the same technical issues we've had for the past fortnight. Now, we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day. We want you to get into the comments, ask us your questions. We can't answer them all, but we will answer the best ones. Morning, Michael. How are you? Yes, we are both here, just about. Oh, everyone's saying good morning. Oh, that's nice. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on how, despite a world-beating vaccine rollout, widespread testing, and, of course, the £37 billion track and trace system, we are apparently in for a very grim COVID winter. Now, Mark, I don't understand how this is possible, because if you've got Boris Johnson in charge and you've spent 3 times what it cost to dig the Channel Tunnel on tracing people with a deadly disease, surely Boris Johnson, Winston Churchill version 2.0, can beat that same deadly disease with the power of words or something like that.
Well, evidently not. But I think even people who like Boris Johnson, and there are clearly millions of people who still do, they've sort of given up expecting any coherence from him on this, haven't they? It is extraordinary that throughout this whole time he's been Prime Minister, and when he does his big speeches unveiling whatever the next plan is, hardly anybody watches, because you just think, oh, what's the point? He does it, and even when he did the big thing, the big rule changes, when I was doing it a bit, and reacted to him going, the maximum number of people in a room at any one time is 0. So if you find yourself in a room, you must leave immediately. Stuff like that. Everybody expects it to be complete gibberish, and yet somehow he gets away with it. And now we're back in the same situation. And I think that's everybody's just making up their own mind. Really, they're looking at their situation themselves and probably going by instinct. My particular instinct is I'm fed up. I'm just so sick of the lockdown. I think it'll be all right, based on no scientific evidence at all, other than the fact that
it'll be all right.
I might as well. If I was Prime Minister doing the press conference, that would be. But I'd go, I've been to the football a couple of times now, and I've been to see a couple of gigs, and I quite enjoyed that. In fact, I loved it rather than sat indoors. So I'm probably going to carry on doing that, even though I'm aware that is probably going to end in disaster.
Now, better for Britain, who might not be using their real name, maybe called Petrovich or something on the end, who knows, says, stop bashing Boris. Okay, let's just talk about some facts better. This time last year, there were 2.5 or 2,500, I should say, 2,500 cases of new infections every day in the UK, right? Today, it's roughly 25,000, okay? It's 10 times worse. And although we have the vaccine, which is brilliant, and although we have track and trace, which is not, and although people are not isolating when they have to because the isolation payments are so low, and although we have very widespread testing that's more widespread than it was then, we've still got threats, as said by Boris, your chum, yesterday, of a really, really crappy winter, right? So those are all facts. That's not bashing Boris, and that's not being opinionated. Those are facts. 2,500 to 25,000 new infections. And if only a tiny proportion of people are getting hospitalised, if you have a much, much bigger number, then more people are going to be hospitalised, despite the vaccine, unfortunately. Now, Plan A, apparently, according to the press conference yesterday, which I didn't watch either, so I Googled it. Plan A is booster jabs and being careful indoors, and maybe wear a mask if you feel like it. If things get worse, Boris Johnson says Plan B is compulsory face masks and vaccine passports, which his ministers have done a total of, count them, Mark, 10 U-turns. Those aren't U-turns. That's just, fairly consistent donuts, if you ask me, which his ministers have done a total of 10 different U-turns over. So we're currently at the state of about 200 deaths a day. And when we get to 1,000 deaths a day, that's lockdown time. Now, Anna here says, when will people in their 40s with cancer get the booster vaccine? And is the flu vaccine shortage due to Brexit? Well, the booster jabs are rolling out. So people in their 40s with something like cancer, if your GP recommends it, you'll be getting it between now and Christmas. I should be getting it between now and Christmas because I've got epilepsy and I'm in category 6. So I should be there as well. But Mark, there was I don't know about the flu vaccine shortage and Brexit. Probably lorry drivers has something to do with it, and the shortage of little glass vials they had to put vaccines in earlier in the year. It's probably a lot of things paying into that. But if you get offered a flu vaccine, definitely take that, because I've had flu, but not COVID. And flu, I felt like I was dying. I was unconscious for like 2 days. It was horrific. So definitely get your flu jab if you need it. But Mark, there's this great bit of marvellous understatement on page 5 of the COVID spread, if we can bring it up. There's a chap called Professor Callum Semple of SAGE, right down in the bottom right-hand corner, you can't see. And he says, get this, I think we're going to have a bit of a rough winter. Well done. How very British of you. How very unlike Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I think Captain Scott said the same thing, didn't he?
Yes, it's a bit nippy out.
Yes, we'll have a rough winter, chaps. Not to worry.
Not to worry. Just power through. Yeah. It'll be absolutely spiffing.
Yes. Yeah. If it gets any colder, we'll enact Plan B.
Plan B is walking outside and just taking one for the team.
I think that anybody who looks at it, even a fleeting glance, if it's not with complete prejudice, can't help but bash Boris, as our correspondent says. It's not because people who are doing that want to make a political point. It's because you can't possibly begin to address the situation unless you accept the fact that the people in charge have made a series of extraordinary mistakes, and that can't just be incompetence. That must be because ideologically they're driven to do that. If the plumber comes round and to try and fix the radiator and burns the house down, you get a different plumber, and stop bashing the plumber. It's a very difficult situation. You've got to address the fact that the people in charge, and one of the worst things, as you say, about 2 things that are really, really criminal. The fact that I wasn't aware that it's 3 times as much as to cross the channel.
12 billion. It was 4 billion in money then, but it's equivalent of 12 billion now.
Right, now that's marvellous. And that's not just a mistake, because the track and trace thing has been so useless that in the end, the most efficient thing to do was, if you had it, delete it. That is really spectacularly useless, when the best thing to do with the thing that's cost 37 billion is to not have it.
Imagine if you ignore it.
Ignore it. Imagine if you bought a television for 37 billion pounds and then went, I can see better if I turn it off and throw it in a skip. That's really, really inefficient. That's not just a bash Boris. We do need to do something clearly different there.
Yeah. But so Rick says, what would you do differently? It sounds like to me you would think to yourself, look, this is the plumber's first proper job. In his 50s. He hasn't had a proper job before now. This is the first time he's ever had to fix a radiator. He's clearly not up to it. I'm going to get a different plumber. Or would you do something different?
Well, I think that the two sort of areas where you would do something different. One is that you could do what they claimed they were doing all along, which would be to follow the science, which they clearly weren't doing, because right at the beginning, I don't want to bore people by going through the litany of chaos here. But if you were to do that, you could go right back to all the scientists, all the people across Europe and so on, initiating the first lockdown. And over here, Boris Johnson thought that in fact not having a lockdown would make us the Superman of Europe, because we'd be the only ones open for business and so on. And they've kept that going. So last Christmas, people remember all the scientists going, for God's sake, what are you doing? No, we must save Christmas. And they boasted about it, and it was on the front page of most papers, Boris saves Christmas. And it was a total disaster, because they are so arrogant that they believe they know better than the science, and that it requires an entirely different outlook and attitude, rather than just 1 or 2 sort of modifications of policy. The other thing is that they are so beholden to the idea that the most efficient thing to do is to parcel things off to their mates, that's why, for example, the 37 billion pounds has gone down the toilet. And it's not just that. There are billions and billions and billions of pounds of contracts for making PPE and indeed making those little vials. Am I right, Susan? You know better than me. Those little things that we were talking about that hold the vaccine. They've all been parcelled out to the most ridiculous, comical people, companies in Mexico that have never made anything like it, and so on. And then they have, for the most part, failed and been extraordinarily expensive. Except at one level, they have been a success, which is they have made extraordinarily huge amounts of money and profit for the mates of the people in the cabinet. Matt Hancock's mate who runs a pub, for example. So I think those. Sorry, yeah.
No, go on. But I think I would like to know all those companies that were in the VIP lane that had the minister's ear and who got special preferential treatment for their PPE deals. I would like to know how much corporation tax, dividend tax, and income tax they have paid. Out of that, because I bet you any money they'll have shuffled it off. Now, Mike says your colleague Dan, that's Dan Bloom, everyone who was on here earlier in the week, is reporting an expected cabinet reshuffle today. However, how big a reshuffle is it going to be? He's probably going to move two people slightly sideways. I don't think he's going to lose a lot of them because he actually needs people to look really bad around him so that he looks better. I think if you had competent people in government, he'd look like an absolute twat, wouldn't he?
Yeah, well. I think we need. I think the most coherent people at the moment seem to be sports people. If we had Gary Neville Prime Minister and Emma Raducanu in charge of education, stuff like that, I think we'd be fine. We'd be sorted within a fortnight.
Yeah, Marcus Rashford could be better than everyone else.
Well, he should. Yeah, no, he should be education, shouldn't he?
Whichever one's available. I mean, they're interchangeable, aren't they? But, as I said, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the winter coming up? I've been saying since last winter that this winter was going to be bad. And I think I said at the start of the pandemic, there's no point paying any attention to Boris Johnson because he's not going to look after you. You've got to look after yourselves. And as we said, some people are due booster jabs. But children under 12... And Kim, we're going to answer that question right now, the point of a COVID passport, because it kind of does stop the spread a bit. Children under 12, even with underlying health problems, are not going to be getting even their first jab in the current rollout. Now, there are 55,000 children. It reports on page 4 of the Mirror today, little sidebar. It's 55,000 children with illnesses like organ transplants, like compromised immune systems, childhood cancers and things like that, who have been shielding at home for more than a year and a half. And they have been told this week, they've all received letters to go back to school, where their classmates are both unvaccinated and riddled with COVID. Now, it says there in the piece, they're quoting a dad who's got 2 children under 10 who are both ill. And he's saying, I'm not sending them back to school because I won't send them back to school because it's going to kill them. But he would face court action if he doesn't, because it's illegal not to send your child to school if the government says you should. But there's other parents out there saying they won't let their children be vaccinated, even though it's not up to them in the law, frankly. And it would save the lives of other children, like this 55,000 mark, who need to go to school and can't go to school because of their illnesses. Is it just me, or are parents far more stupid than their children are?
Yes, probably, yeah. Yeah, I think that is the answer. I think the younger generation are far brighter than people are sort of my age. We're useless.
Children on those anti-vax protests, but they have been dragged there by their parents.
Yeah. What do you do with these people? I think this is the problem. This is what I don't understand, and I honestly don't understand what you do. Because if what I'm not sure about, and you follow these figures, and I can't understand them. But the people who are being hospitalised now, what is the proportion of them that are people who have not been vaccinated? Because go on.
I can't answer quite that, but I can answer something similar. So if you're not vaccinated, you're in hospital and you die, 99% of deaths are amongst the unvaccinated, right?
99%?
Yes. And 1% are people who've been vaccinated of the deaths that are in hospital. So you're 10 times more likely to die if you go to hospital when you've got
90% or 99%.
10 times more likely to die if you have nearly 100. No, it's 99% versus 1%. So it's 99 times more likely to die think. My maths isn't very good, so I'm in.
Well, that'd be 100 times. But even that doesn't sell it, because the number of people that haven't been vaccinated is only 5 million, whereas 48 million have been vaccinated. So it would make it even more than that, because...
Yeah, but that's once you get to hospital and then your chances...
Oh, I see, right.
So the proportion of those, most is spreading, obviously, amongst most people who are unvaccinated.
Well, what do you do then? I don't know what you do. That is a problem that I don't know what you do with, because if people just won't be vaccinated, what can you do? Well, you can't keep society closed because 5 million people have read something on the internet.
It happens with the MMR, happens with everything. There is a portion of people who will not get vaccinated or have their children vaccinated. And that's why things spread. And that's why you do still get measles in children and outbreaks, despite the fact that it's vile disease. Now, we were asked earlier on, what's the benefit of a COVID passport? The passport itself doesn't stop a spread, but it does compel people to provide evidence. And you can't go into a big venue like Mark's been talking about already, football matches or gigs. The talk is for plan B would be you'd have to have a passport in order to show that you could get in, or that you get in and out of the country, depending on how they would suggest that you use it. And we don't know quite what the detail, the small print would be. So if you are unvaccinated, you are more likely to spread it than someone who's vaccinated. And therefore you are not going to be allowed into places where there are big groups of people, if plan B kicks in. Now, if you're vaccinated, you can also still spread it, but you're far, far less likely to. And you're going to be shedding a smaller amount of the virus. So you're not giving the big viral load to the other people you're spreading it to. So it is generally better all round to be vaccinated. But Sophie says, why isn't Chris Whitty listening to the advice given by JCVI, that the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, that they don't think 12 to 15-year-olds need the jab? They're also saying they'll only give the first jab after the second because it can affect the heart. Now, what's happened here, Sophie, is Chris Whitty has listened to the advice given by the JCVI. The JCVI is only able to consider medical issues. So it says medically, for a 12 to 15-year-old, the risk of death from COVID is so small that they don't merit having the vaccine. Chris Whitty, as Chief Medical Officer, and the other 3 Chief Medical Officers in the United Kingdom are able to consider other factors, and they've considered the ability of unvaccinated children both to spread the disease to others and to come off school, right, and to miss their education. And they have ruled that the overall benefit, because even medically speaking, if you are spending a lot of time off school, your lifelong health chances are infinitely less. Your education is less, your attainment in exams is less, your earning capacity is less, your long-term health is less, and your life expectancy is less if you don't go to school. Simple as that. So he said, look, it makes sense for the kids to have it as well, but only over 12. So I hope that answers the question. Michael says, what's the forecast for totally empty supermarket shelves? Mark, I think it's totally empty supermarket shelves raining down upon us from now until Christmas, isn't it?
It's possible, isn't it? I'll just say there's one more thing on that, because, that's a very eloquent and concise explanation there in answer to the viewer that sent that question in. And I would hope that sort of explains it. But the trouble is, and I really honestly don't know the answer. What do you do to the millions of people who just, it doesn't matter what logic you say, they just go, yeah, but I read this and it's not true and so on. And what do you, it is like I've been saying this to you, it's a bit like, if you argue with the conspiracy theorists, which people are getting like that, you don't know what's in it. You don't know what's in it. And then they'll eat a kebab that they've bought off the van at the side of the road or something, or especially the people who are going, you don't know what's in it, man. And they'll buy like a bag of weed off a bloke in the corner of a pub,
what's in it as well.
Yeah. Well, but they don't. When they use toothpaste, do they investigate it first before knowing what's in it? It's so absurd. But I just don't know what you do. It's like, and you have these arguments sometimes with people. And I've said to someone, it is better like if they just went, do you know there's no such place as Ipswich? I read it on the internet. It's made up. It's just made up. And if you went, but I've been there. Oh, they've got to you then. There's nothing you can say. And
I covered the Suffolk Strangler story, and I've been to Ipswich, and I'm pretty certain it is made up.
Oh yeah.
No one would create Ipswich.
You would, because you work for the MSN. I don't know what you do, and then And then so I don't know what is the answer. If you, for example, right, philosophically, what would you say if the only people who were suffering from COVID from now on were people who refused to have the vaccine? I know there are people who can't have it for very special reasons, and that's a different issue. But people who just went, no, I'm not having it, and they were the only ones who were suffering. Should we then shut down society in any way because they were getting ill?
If it was just them, I would say, fine, mate, move to the graveyard because you're going to be in there in a minute. The trouble is that when you are unvaccinated and you get it, you're giving it to a bunch of other people, including risking 55,000 children with compromised immune systems, hundreds of thousands of adults who are having to shield, who have respiratory weaknesses or immune problems or something like that. People like me who've got epilepsy. There is a neurological link to all flus, but also to COVID, which would make my epilepsy worse. It could even kill me or cause brain damage or something. So there isn't strong links between epilepsy and COVID that anyone's found, but there is a neurological link to the long COVID. So it may make things worse for me if I got it. And I just think you're just a scumbag if you don't care about those sick children that can't go to school and can't come out of the house and their parents are terrified. And that's it. And that's flat. I'm just black and white about that, I'm afraid. If you
were the Prime Minister, would you say that then? Would you go on and go, look, if you don't have the vaccine, you're a scumbag?
I'd take them all to Ipswich.
Now Chris Whitty will answer questions.
Everyone who doesn't have the vaccine would be compelled to move to Ipswich, and I'd build a wall around it like in The Walking Dead. And when it's over and whoever survives can come out. And that's it. Fine. And I'll put Rick Grimes in there as well.
It could be on telly and the people could be...
There we are. I've answered the question about what I would do if I was Prime Minister. Now, what I would do, actually, I did answer that question. I would have locked down earlier, like Jacinda had done. I would have actually had proper border quarantine that Sage has suggested, which was not letting anybody in without checking them at the airport, not this hotel rubbish. And I would have paid a universal basic income to every adult in the UK, which would have worked out cheaper than the crap furlough system and everything else we've had, which missed out 10% of employees.
That is a critical thing, because whenever you met people, when I met people who were not following the lockdown, almost always that was the reason. It would be a cab driver or someone like that who was just terrified. And obviously someone is going to be more susceptible to the idea that, the lockdown doesn't really matter, it's all sort of exaggerated. If by following the lockdown, the chances are you're going to be thrown out of your house because you can't afford the rent or whatever. That's fairly obvious, isn't it? So I think that's pretty critical. And that probably has also fed into the number of people who just don't believe the government. And also, the big chemical companies are liars and terrible profiteering people and so on. So, but then also some people are idiots. So that's quite
Yeah, and there we have one of our regular contributors, Deb. Hello, Deb. You're a fake profile. Laugh my flipping arse off. I think she's supposed to be talking about you, Mark. Are you the Mark Steele vaccinologist and anti-vaxxer who regularly comes out and talks about epidemiology and other things? About? Or are you just someone pretending to be a comedian?
I'm both of them things, because you can't believe that they can fake the images now, Deb. That's what they can do. I might be anyone. I could be Donald Trump. They can fake it and they can do the voice. They can give it a sort of South London voice. They can do that. There is,
and they also put words in his mouth. I've told you what to say.
For people not aware of this, which of course almost hardly anyone will be, there is another Mark Steele who is now one of the sort of leading figures in the anti-vaccine. He's all speaking at Trafalgar Square alongside David Icke and all that sort of thing. And 5G gives you, I don't know, gives you hemorrhoids or whatever the argument is.
Yeah,
and it's not me. That's not me, Deb. That's fine.
Yes, Mark is Mark. Don't worry, Deb. We're still not sure if you're Deborah, because you do come on in quite a lot talking rubbish. Now, we do have some other news that we want to talk about, and which Mark may be more of an expert in. And today in the Mirror, on the op-ed page there, Keir Starmer has made a major policy announcement. Hooray! At the TUC conference. and it's to absolutely zero fanfare apart from here in the Mirror, because their messaging and their media management is so abysmal. Now, Keir's told the TUC that he would have, as Prime Minister, he would have a £10 minimum wage, which would put about £1.50 or more, depending on your age, on the basic, and it would bring it into line roughly with the national living wage. So, Mark, why do you think this stuff is not getting much of an airing outside the Mirror? Because a £10 minimum wage, if Boris suggested it, that would be all over the front page of the Daily Mail.
Yes. Well, I suppose there's two answers, really. Oh, I'm sounding like a politician. I would like to answer that question by making the following 2 points. I think there are two answers. One is the one that's quite legitimate to say. If you own the Daily Telegraph, or if you are Rupert Murdoch or Desmond or someone who owns one of the major newspapers, it is not in your interests to publicise the fact that the Labour Party have come up with something that is going to be both fair and popular, especially as it's going to cost a little tiny fraction of the extraordinary growth in wealth for the richest 0.1%. So they're not going to publicise that. They support the Conservatives, and that's the reason. So that's one. The other reason is that the Labour Party has, for some years, completely lost the ability to be able to set the agenda despite that, because that's the rules. We know that's the rules. We know the Sun and most of the sort of newspapers and so on are going to be hostile to you, and they've not found a strategy to be able to get their message out. I mean, I was saying to someone the other day, it's a bit like when the Labour Party does come up with something now, it's a little bit like if you saw a branch of Woolworths, you'd think, oh, I forgot that was still going.
Yeah, they're still there. Paul Shearing asked earlier on, his comments disappeared. He said, whatever happened to the Labour Party? And one of the things I would probably think to do with its media management is that it's done by committee these days. Right. So if you, for example, are campaigning for nuclear test veterans and you want Keir Starmer to say something about it, it has to get passed through about 5 different groups of people with different things to worry about: the social team, the press team, the defence team, the something else team, in order for it to actually come out. So it's really slow and it's cumbersome. And I think part of, I don't know who introduced that, is definitely one of the worst things that Corbyn left Starmer when he left the leader of the opposition's office. It needs fixing. They need a Malcolm Tucker. They need an Alistair Campbell figure just come in and bash. Yes,
I think there is a bit of that, and I do think that part of it is an ideological sort of starting point that goes. If you start from the point that all mainstream media, or whatever sort of peculiar phrase you use, is hostile, and you start from the point we don't like them. I certainly think that's what happened to the messaging process, whatever you want to call it, under the Corbyn's rule. They started from the point of like, we don't like the press, and I think then you're in terrible trouble, because you're going to give off the wrong thing all along. For example, I know John Pienaar quite well, who was at the time.
Oh, name dropping!
Well, no, I know. We've had. Oh, that's terrible. No, I know him because he's a Palace fan, and I see him down the page. Honestly, I'm desperately trying to run backwards now and go, no, it's not because, yes, it's because I saw him at the, what's that thing?
I saw him at the Met Gala the other day.
Yeah, exactly. He was wearing the most wonderful tuxedo, and he rather put his shape. No, it wasn't that. No, it's not. Oh, no, that's terrible. I know what you mean. Right, I know, because he down the bottom of Henry Road.
All right, anyway, John Pienaar said.
Right, and he said, like, because I was on his programme once, and he said that we're trying to get hold of someone from the Labour Party, because it was a Sunday morning, Radio 5, quite a big thing. I don't know, 500,000 people listen to it or something. And we try to get someone from the Labour Party, and we ring them, and we leave 5 messages, and no one gets back to us. Now, that isn't just, I'm incompetent, and I don't get back to people, but but then eventually I do, if I think, oh no, I really ought to do that. If Radio 5 said, please come on a programme and publicise your policy that you wish to be publicised because you are trying to become the government.
Yeah, the Sunday morning political shows are a big deal.
But they
don't
even.
Corbyn, by the way.
Completely. And And I think
he never worked weekends. He always wanted time in lieu if he had to work weekends.
But this wasn't Corbyn himself. This would be just want anyone.
That was his how he ran the party, and so the shadow cabinet and his team and the press and everything else. It was the leader's not around. Why should we be? So nothing happened at the weekends under Corbyn at all. Keir's lot is a bit better, but still bad.
Right. And now part of the problem, I think, as well, Susie, is that so much of the Labour Party, or so much of the most sort of vocal people in the Labour Party, are divided between one camp or the other. So if someone in the Corbyn camp was watching this now, they'd go, "Oh, Mark Steele's betrayed Corbyn." And if you say anything about Keir Starmer not doing anything, well, oh right, that's all because Corbyn got it wrong. And the two sides are at war and blaming everything on everybody else. And as a result of that, there's just this nothing. So I don't know. They might now go, "Well, we're ahead in the polls," but I fear that that's not as cheery as it might be for reasons that you'll know better than me.
No, I think that's an accidental ahead in the polls, unfortunately, which is a shame because I've met Keir Starmer, and I found him very impressive compared to how he comes across on the telly. He was very bish bash bosh on it, quite loud of voice.
Bish bash bosh, like a plasterer. Is that all put on then for if you catch him off guard, he's going, "Oh, gee, what I'm sick and tired of
it comes across badly on the telly, I think. As I'm sure probably Boris Johnson also comes across differently on the television. A lot of politicians do. I don't know why they put on the TV voice, and it's terrible normally. And my TV voice makes me sound more competent than I normally do. Anyway, we had Lost Transport there telling us that the national minimum wage at the moment is £8.91. That's if you're over 21 or 25, I think. So it's a bit less if you're 18-year-old starting out. And of course, it's rising to somewhere near £10 by 2023. And the next general election isn't to 2024. So Keir Starmer can promise a £10 minimum wage without really having to dip too deep into anybody else's pockets. But maybe he meant £10 right now. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Now, we do have some good news, though. And here it is. After all the going and the throwing, the decades of allegations and denials, the leaks, the lawsuits, the suicide, and the manhunt, it now turns out that the Queen's second son may be compelled to give a witness statement under oath in Virginia Giuffre's case against him, namely that he benefited personally, is the allegations that he, of course, strenuously denies, from the sex trafficking, she says, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell carried out with her. Under the Hague Convention, it would appear right there in the last paragraph of that story, English courts will help American courts get evidence for their court cases. And the Queen's children, of course, can be compelled to go to court even if she can't. Princess Anne's been prosecuted before now, so there's no reason that Andrew can't be subject to the court's order. And basically, because the Queen runs the courts, it's Regina prosecuting people and running the courts, it would be his own mother compelling him to testify somehow in this case. And of course, she's been shielding up till now, so that's really quite fun. Mark, do you think we're ever going to actually see him on the steps of a court a la John Leslie declaring his innocence?
It'd be funny, wouldn't it? It would just be fantastic. Oh God, it'll probably Amazon Prime will buy the rights, and lots of people won't be able to see it. To be a shame. I don't know. We can't know, or indeed say, even if we did think we know, whether he's guilty or not. But I think we can say that if your defence is that you had to fly to America to stay in the house of a convicted paedophile in order to tell that person that you weren't prepared to be their friend anymore, and that you were in a Pizza Express in Woking, even though there doesn't seem to be any record of that, which there might be on account of the fact you were second in line to the throne at the time, and you don't sweat, you probably ought to be locked away for your own protection.
I think you should have been locked away before any of this, actually. He's arguably not the sharpest tool in the box. Although, of course, Falklands War hero, da-di-da. But really inclined to hang around with entirely the wrong people, it must be said.
What was Princess Anne convicted of, by the way? Was she convicted?
Princess Anne was up for dangerous dog. So her dog had attacked someone.
Oh, right.
It was a staffy, I think. and it had attacked someone or another dog, and she was prosecuted for that and paid her fine. And I think quite a few of them have been done for speeding. I think Andrew's been done for speeding. And I've done him for a few things in the pages of the Mirror in the past.
Did he try to defend himself and say it can't have been me that was doing 123 miles an hour up the M6, because at the time I was at McDonald's in Basingstoke.
I was at McDonald's having a massage. Yeah, who knows? Now, but there's good news. Perhaps he will actually be compelled to go to court. That would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be the same as the rest of us. You know, if Virginia Giuffre launched a case in the US against me, and she wanted to serve me papers, I'd say, thank you very much. I'd take the papers from her. I'd get a lawyer. I'd do my bit. I'd explain the thing. And I'd say, I had no idea she was trafficked. Whoopsie. And whatever it might be. Isabella says, what about Israel? Sorry, I thought for a moment you were going to be completely off topic. Almost the entire country is double jabbed and they're having a crazy surge in cases. Oh, wait, that doesn't fit the narrative. What the unvaccinated are the problem? So we won't answer that question. Here's the question. We are answering it. I don't know quite the reasons for the surge in Israel because I'm not an expert in it, unlike you, Isabella, you're plainly an epidemiologist. But they are rolling out vaccinations amongst children in Israel because they are worried about this extra surge. There is a problem, of course, with new variants, which may well be linked to it, and they are far, far more infectious. I think the R rate of the Delta variant is about 7, and that makes it more infectious than Ebola. And of course, the Delta variant was imported by Boris Johnson into this country. We've got 200 deaths a day. There's about 7,000 deaths a day worldwide. So that's quite a large proportion. Please get vaccinated. Rachel says, why aren't they using all the Nightingale hospitals? The NHS is overrun because the government has orchestrated it. The Nightingale hospital's been shut down, I think, Rachel. They decided the problem with the Nightingale hospitals was they did them wrong. Right, I'm going to very quickly do this, and then we have to wind up, Mark. But in China, right, when the Wu flu first appeared, they set up fever clinics. And so if you had any of the symptoms of COVID, you went to this special clinic that was away from the hospital. That meant the hospital would carry on doing its stuff, right, which is what we didn't do. They had these fever clinics, and you would go there, and you had to stay there. You get tested, you get looked after by staff and all the rest of it. And they did it very, very harshly. So if your child had symptoms of COVID, it got taken away from its parents. Bash. It was in there by itself. But that was how they were able to restrain and really stamp on it. In this country, they tried to set up Nightingale hospitals to look a bit like that. But in order to get people in there, you'd have to have several nurses for every bed and a doctor, a consultant looking after about half a dozen different beds. And a lot of the people who would have gone to the NHS hospitals in the last wave, in the Nightingale hospitals rather, would have had really complex underlying health conditions. So if someone who was transferred from an ICU went to a Nightingale hospital, they would have to have taken with them the kidney consultant, the cancer consultant and the ICU consultant, as well as half a dozen nurses. So that's why the Nightingale hospitals didn't get used. Most people who had COVID had so many things wrong with them, they just couldn't spare the staff. And we've got huge numbers of vacancies in our NHS because of 10 years of Tory underinvestment. There you go. Back to Boris again at the
A very comprehensive answer. I suspect, though, that the people sending in those questions are probably they're all mates of Andrew, and they knew that we were talking about him, and they wanted to stop the discussion about him.
Yeah, it's orchestrated.
You've got to think, see, that's what's going on.
It's all been orchestrated by the royal family. Margaret says, how many people have died of COVID-19 and how many people are still alive because they had the COVID-19 jab? I don't know the precise figures, but there are, it's about 150,000, I think, in this country at the moment. It's growing, of course, every day. About 180 odd yesterday have died with COVID-19 on their death certificates. And there are thought to be many hundreds of thousands of people who've been protected by the jab. So the figure is better if you've had the vaccine. I am looking forward to my booster. I'm looking forward to seeing Prince Andrew in court. I would like to apologise to the good town of Ipswich. I'm sure it's a charming place when prostitutes aren't being murdered there, which is frankly the last time I saw it. So, you know, I've got a biased view of it. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for taking part, even Deb. We'll see you again next Monday for a special edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye.